Across Africa, a quiet revolution is taking place. Not through the barrels of guns, nor through slogans of the past, but through vision, strategy, and unity. A generation of African leaders is emerging. Men and women determined to reclaim their nation's sovereignty and economic destiny. Leaders who refuse to bow to the pressures of the West. They are charting a new course, one built on independence, solidarity, and bold partnerships with the global South. From Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré to Mali's Assimi Goïta, Niger's Abderrahmane Tiani, and Senegal's newly elected Bassirou Diomaye Faye, these are not the politicians of yesterday. They are the architects of a new Africa, confident, unyielding, and determined to be heard on their own terms. For decades, Africa's narrative has been shaped by others. From the era of colonial empires to the rise of Western aid and conditional loans, decisions about Africa were often made far from its shores. Financial dependency became a weapon, and political interference followed close behind. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank programs, while promising development, often left nations bound by debt and external control. Military presence, too, became a tool of influence. France maintained bases across West Africa, in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, under the banner of counter-terrorism. But over time, resentment grew. The people began to ask, whose security is really being protected? And from that question, a movement was born, one that demanded dignity, self-determination, and economic freedom. In September 2022, a young army captain named Ibrahim Traoré seized power in Burkina Faso. At just 34 years old, Traoré became one of the youngest leaders in the world, and quickly, one of the most controversial. His message was clear: Africa must take control of its own destiny. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso expelled French troops, suspended Western aid programs, and began forging new alliances, not with former colonial powers, but with African neighbors and alternative partners like Russia, Turkey, and China. In a historic move, Traoré declared that Burkina Faso would no longer serve foreign interests at the expense of its people. He nationalized parts of the mining sector, launched local currency reforms, and emphasized self-sufficiency in food and defense. Critics in the West called it reckless, but across Africa, it was seen as courageous. For many, Traoré represented what post-independence leadership was meant to be: a fearless, unapologetic, and truly sovereign. As Western influence waned, a powerful new bloc began to take shape. In late 2023, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, all led by military governments that came to power amid political crises, announced the formation of a defense alliance, later known as the Alliance of Sahel States. Their goal: mutual defense, shared development, and independence from outside control. When ECOWAS, under Western pressure, threatened military action and sanctions against the new governments, the alliance responded in unison. An attack on one will be an attack on all. It was a turning point in West African geopolitics. For the first time in decades, African nations were uniting not through external mediation, but through shared purpose. Soon after, the alliance began negotiating new trade corridors, energy deals, and military cooperation, bypassing Western intermediaries. The West called it a dangerous precedent. Africans called it a rebirth. Africa's assertion of independence was not just political, it was economic. By 2024, leaders across the continent were calling for a move away from the CFA franc, a currency long tied to the French treasury. In its place, the idea of monetary sovereignty took root. Mali and Burkina Faso announced plans to introduce local gold-backed digital currencies. Meanwhile, trade partnerships began to pivot eastward. China, Russia, India, and Gulf states increased their presence in Africa, investing in railways, technology, and green energy. The African Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) accelerated integration, giving the continent the largest single market in the world by population. Africa was no longer begging for investment, it was choosing it, and that choice sent shockwaves through Western capitals. For the first time, Africa was positioning itself not as a recipient of aid, but as a player in global power realignment. In 2024, the election of Bassirou Diomaye Faye in Senegal signaled a democratic extension of this continental awakening. At 44, Faye represented a new kind of leadership. Young, reformist, Pan-African, yet diplomatically skilled. His victory speech set the tone. Senegal will be open to the world, but not owned by it. He pushed for greater African control over natural resources, transparent contracts with foreign investors, and stronger intra-African trade. In doing so, Faye bridged two worlds, the revolutionary fervor of the Sahel alliance and the diplomatic pragmatism needed to bring Africa together at the table of global negotiation. The symbolism was clear. Africa's new leaders were not anti-West, they were pro-sovereignty. And that distinction was key to their success. In Washington, Paris, and Brussels, concern turned to strategy. Western governments had long relied on African partnerships for resources, military cooperation, and influence within global institutions. But with the rise of independent African leaders and the growing reach of BRICS nations, the balance was shifting. Western sanctions and diplomatic pressure only strengthened African resolve. In response, new channels of engagement emerged, less paternalistic, more competitive. The United States launched new investment frameworks. Europe sought to reset its African policy. But for many Africans, the message was simple: respect, not control. The age of dependency was ending, and the age of equality was beginning. Behind every political shift lies a deeper movement, one powered by Africa's greatest asset, its people. With a median age under 20, Africa's youth are the driving force of this transformation. Connected, educated, and globally aware, they are demanding leadership that reflects their aspirations, not colonial legacies. From social media activism to grassroots entrepreneurship, a new civic consciousness is rising, one that measures success not by foreign approval, but by local impact. This generation is building the Africa they want to inherit, confident, united, and proud. As Africa enters the mid-2020s, its journey remains complex, marked by both progress and peril. Corruption, conflict, and external manipulation remain challenges, but the momentum for change is undeniable. The vision of a united, sovereign, and self-sustaining Africa is no longer a dream, it's a strategy. And its champions, Traore, Goïta, Tiani, Faye, and countless others, are writing a new chapter in African history. One in which Africa is no longer the world's resource, but its partner. Not the periphery, but the center. Not a story of exploitation, but of emergence. For generations, Africa was defined by others, by empires, by aid, by dependency. But today, a different Africa is taking shape, proud, strategic, and unstoppable. These leaders who stood up to the West did not just defy power, they reclaimed identity. And in doing so, they've ignited something greater than politics, a movement of sovereignty, a return of confidence, a belief that the future belongs to those who build it, not those who are told to wait for it. As the world looks to Africa once more, it is not for pity or profit, but for partnership. This is Africa's century. And this time, the world will watch, not as a witness to its struggle, but as a participant in its rise.